Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorsi, and today I am very, very honored and excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Miss Madison Feehan. Madison is the CEO and founder of Space Copy, the first company creating a multi-purpose interplanetary manufacturing and testing device, combining lunar regolith sampling, spectral data analysis, AI machine learning software, and 3D printing into one mechanism. Mind blowing for me. Madison is also the CFO and co founder of Moon Trades. She is the G100 Region Chair for Space Technology and Aviation for the province of Alberta and also previously worked at NASA. As a young professional, Madison has already accomplished so much and is creating waves in the aerospace industry. When I first read and learned about Madison's journey, I immediately was intrigued to learn about her journey to where she is today, as well as her future career goals as she treks the aerospace sector. So, welcome, Madison. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders. I'm very, very excited for our conversation today.
Well, thank you so very much, Gitika. It's an honor to be here and talking with the Ignited Thinkers, who are a very, very inspiring community.
Thank you so much. Yeah, one of the biggest things that stood out to me when I first read about your background was your entrepreneurship journey. Starting a company, I mean, being able to work at NASA, but then finding a place for you, finding a problem in the aerospace industry that you wanted to solve with your own company is just incredible as a young space entrepreneur. So I wanted to start off by asking a little bit more about Space Copy. What was your inspiration for founding Space Copy, and what are the current goals your company has, and what are its future visions?
Oh, I love the question. Thank you so much. Okay, let me kick things off by explaining in brief who we are and what we do. So, Space Copy is an additive manufacturing company. We are based in the United States and Canada, founded in 2022 to create novel 3D printing systems that are going to be able to function in extreme environments for infrastructure development in Earth and in space. So, in essence, if you can imagine, what we're doing is instead of using a standard feedstock like plastic, we are taking literally soil or sand off the ground. We are analyzing its chemical constituency. We are processing it, and then we are making it into a feedstock that can be easily 3D printed to create literally anything from supplies to infrastructure to repair parts to precision tools, literally imagining anything that you might need for space, military, defense, natural disaster response, anything. Yeah, in essence, I suppose the inspiration for starting Space Copy did definitely come from my background with NASA. So, as you kind of explained in the intro, yes, I had about 4.5 years work experience, and I was working for their planetary science, heliophysics, and astrophysics divisions. And I guess I got a very good, well-rounded knowledge from that. But also when I was there, I noticed that there was a very, very big gap, both on the science front and also on the economic front, between being able to send humans to the moon versus actually keeping them there. So I suppose along that journey, I kind of discovered that there was this huge gap and that needed to be remediated. And not always, the government doesn't always have the budget to be able to figure out that solution. So that's really where commercial industry comes into play.
Wow. I mean, now I guess the name Space Copy makes a lot more sense. It's incredible. I mean, just the idea of using what's already in these and on the moon or on Mars and being able to understand its mixture, its composition, and create something out of it is honestly seems surreal and very movie-like, which all of space technology really is, to some extent. So that's amazing. And I'm curious, are there specific R&D developments you're doing right now to focus on a particular type of soil composition, to develop certain type of technology? Do you have a current like specific focus that the company is like the first target goal for the company? And how are you going about this R&D stage? Because I know for every company, the initial R&D phases are the toughest ones to kind of grow in. And so how has that process been for Space Copy?
Well, I always say I love a challenge, and this has certainly been a challenge. We started with just taking a standard lunar soil simulant and we mixed it with some thermoplastics to see if we could even create, I guess, a filament to really understand if you could manufacture with it. So that was proven successful right out of the gate, first time around. And then after that, we've just basically been planning, working with subject matter experts, academic experts to try and understand what types of additive manufacturing are going to be most functional. So I'll reverse course for a minute and state that at Space Copy, we mainly use around 2 to 3 different kinds of manufacturing. The first is a subtractive method called casting, and that's good for making super redundant parts like interlocking bricks for, say, habitats or roadways or launch pads. And then opposite to that, we have more of the precision tooling and fabrication. That's going to be done through a process called selective laser melting. And then kind of that medium-sized infrastructure, even some of the smaller stuff, can be created with fused deposition modeling, which, if you can imagine, it's kind of that standard extruder-based printing it layer by layer. It's traditionally what you would imagine with 3D printing. So we've been fortunate to do the SLM and the FDM tests so far. We were working with off-the-shelf equipment first to make sure everything was working. And we used a lunar soil simulant that was 99.9% accurate to Apollo 17 soil. And the most important thing about that, of course, is the Apollo 17, especially in that kind of highlands area, had such a similar composition to what Chandrayaan-3 had discovered in the lunar South Pole when they did the initial LiDAR tests last year. So the South Pole, it hasn't been studied very much, so we don't really know what we're walking into, but we do try to do the best that we can. So right now, we are doing selective laser melting tests with a volcanic soil that was recovered from a volcanic site in Taiwan. And that actually boasts similar compositions to the original Apollo 11 soil, but it also doubles as a terrestrial basalt. So we're actually getting a 2-in-1 experiment where we get to validate that the soil would work for an Earth-based application and a space-based application all in one. And those coupons, once they're done being printed, we're going to scale it up, start printing some precision tools like wrenches, for example. And then those parts are going to be shipped down to our partners at Johns Hopkins University for some lunar analog testing later this year.
Wow, I am simply mind blown. I don't think I've ever heard of such an innovative and exciting project and exciting endeavor as this one. I'm truly excited because I think this is a perfect application of how space and Earth can go hand in hand. And this type of technology can revolutionize manufacturing to a certain extent as we know it today on Earth. And it's just amazing to think about it. I mean, it's incredible. And I have to ask, like, with your background in astrophysics, how did you, once you had this idea, how did you put together a team to be able to find, the correct placements to do this R&D and finding the correct partners and taking this idea you had, which you so strongly believed in, and then actually making it a reality, taking it a step forward and making it a company? Because I know so many young students or even adults who have an idea. The toughest part is going from an idea and making it into an action, making it into something tangible, and you've been able to do that. And so I'm really curious. I'm sure the journey was not easy, but I'm curious, what was that transition like for you as a young entrepreneur in this field?
Well, it's certainly a challenge being a young female entrepreneur. I mean, for context, I'm 20 years old. So it's definitely not something that you hear of every day, somebody starting a space company, and the fact that we've been in business for a year and a half now. So to reverse course a bit, my traditional education background is in commerce right now. I'm getting my degree with a double major in international business and entrepreneurship with a prior background from Harvard Business School. And that really, really was what gave me that kind of edge over disruptive innovation and really helped me unlock the potential of what it takes to run a business. And I got to see it from so many different facets, from industry experts who were kind of in that field working for 30 years and then going back and teaching us. And that was a really good opportunity for me to capitalize on something that I really loved, was super passionate about, and that was space. So I've been so passionate about space ever since I was a kid. And to think about it, I actually started Space Copy while being part of something that was called the NASA Space Apps Challenge. Um, it's held every single year in the fall, and one year they had a theme about 3D printing. That time it was on Mars, though. But suffice it to say, I was working on the project. We had put together a great team, and afterwards, I just didn't want it to end. I wanted to keep working on what it would take to do 3D printing in space, and I started working on the concept a bit more. It's something that I had just kind of done high level research about, in previous years, but never really applied myself towards. So I figured, okay, let's start. Let's do something. Registered in an accelerator program with Techstars, a leading venture capital firm, and we went through this incredible program with the government of Saudi Arabia, and we launched the company. And I decided to get incorporated and go through all the motions, getting that intellectual property secured. Now we're patent pending. Now we're kind of that technology readiness level 3. And I just started leveraging every single network connection that I could, going to webinars with other subject matter experts from NASA. There's a couple of subgroups and organizations that come out of private industry where there's a really, really good coalition of experts you can just kind of sit there and brainstorm with. And then finally, eventually, I realized I can't do it on my own. There's way too many tasks that goes into engineering something like this magnitude. So I was fortunate to be able to recruit an incredibly stellar staff. And that certainly wasn't easy. I can imagine around, I'd say about 200 interviews before down selecting the final few. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to not only the passion, but also just that inspiration and collaborative opportunity to work together with people who also feel that kind of passion and inspiration behind the project. And that's how I know that we're going to be successful.
It's just amazing what you're doing, and I think especially what you were saying about taking advantage of the network around you and the accelerators, the programs, putting yourself out there, and most importantly, just really strongly believing in your idea to take it forward is quite amazing. And you know what I was going to say is I had no idea that you were only 20 years old. That's amazing feat. And so what was your educational path like? Now I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about your story. So before finding Space Copy, you mentioned you were part of the NASA Space Apps Challenge. So what was your educational track like to get to where you are today, and where did space and astrophysics come into your life?
Okay, so I'm still in school right now, and I'm going to be for a very long time. So I'm still getting my degree in commerce. But as I've been working towards that, I've also been getting a whole bunch of upskilled courses. And I always recommend this, especially to young people, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, is to take a bunch of courses online or in person in various different fields so that you upskill your knowledge base in a whole bunch of various different fields. And I was privileged to be able to do that for a couple of 3D printing courses and basic engineering courses. So I was getting that kind of well-rounded knowledge into what it might take to actually go down that road. But I actually spent 2 years in a program with Harvard Business School that was focused on disruptive innovation, entrepreneurship, mastering negotiation, learning the essentials of business. And while I was doing that, I wasn't really focused on space. At the time, I was just doing my regular NASA work. Some of it was volunteer. I do a lot of citizen science work. But just I'd say that that coalition of just a whole bunch of different things, coming from the business perspective and getting some formal education from that side, but then polar opposite to that, having that work experience and volunteer experience with NASA, did a little bit of stuff for the European Space Agency as well as a citizen scientist, mostly in the data analytics realm, but also a little bit on 3D printing. So I just got to learn so much, and this is a huge part of what I encourage other people who are getting into the industry or want to be involved in STEM is to always strive for continued learning. I know it's something that deeply resonates with me, and it's something I always wish to spread to others, especially the female leaders in STEM, because there's only 18% of us in the workforce. So being able to catalyze on that and be able to share these opportunities with each other, and most importantly, is share the knowledge and just spread that kind of open science mindset too.
That's amazing. And you mentioned these citizen scientist programs both at NASA and the European Space Agency. And as a student, how do you get involved in these types of opportunities? I know a lot of young students are seeking for research opportunities or job experiences, and it's hard when you don't have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree to prove your qualifications. So, how do you suggest students approach these types of opportunities and look for these types of opportunities, whether it be at NASA, ESA, or other space companies or organizations?
Well, I can definitely speak to my experience, which is I got my job at NASA by accident. I didn't even know 100% that I was working for them until they sent me paperwork trying to get me to file for my paycheck. I actually thought I was doing volunteer work. What I always recommend to people is when you're starting out, do volunteer work. There's usually an open call to science on platforms like NASA's website. Every once in a while, you'll see like become a volunteer reviewer for us for this division or that. Um, I used to love to go to platforms like Zooniverse that partner up with NASA and the European Space Agency and places like CERN, for example. And they put together these data projects where they have, for example, 100,000 entries of AI generated data from databases that hasn't been processed. And then they look for students, especially the young ones, whether you're in high school, early university, or even just a hobbyist, to go in and do that data analysis. And oftentimes, as a reward of that, you can get a certificate that could lead to a future internship program, etc. And that really is, I suppose, what opens the doors. And then the last note that I'll add to that is a lot of it comes down to networking. I think it's a big principle. It's not only for the entrepreneurship side, but it's also for the trying to just build your career up. And you certainly have a lot to prove when you're a young person in this sector. Not many people want to take you seriously unless you have a PhD. So being able to, first of all, be humble and learn from the people around you, but also just immerse yourself and constantly look for opportunities. Be ambitious to learn and gain that knowledge and have fun with it too along the way, of course. That's my recipe to success. That seems to be working so far, and I definitely want to instill that in a future generation.
Yes, that's incredibly inspiring. I think you said it all with the networking is such an important piece to building that community that will support you, provide that insider scoop on navigating this space, but most importantly, putting yourself in different situations. You mentioned what started off as possibly a volunteer opportunity turned into a job with a paycheck, which you didn't even realize. And I think trying to put yourself in all these different situations, research about different calls, different opportunities that different organizations have, and try putting yourself in these different situations to see which one clicks. And maybe one of them can open more doors, which could lead to more doors as it has for you. So I think your story is very inspiring to students like myself, adults who are probably navigating this space as well. And I think what you're saying is it's just beyond exciting, and what you're doing is very, very important to the space sector. And throughout this journey, I'm sure, as you mentioned, being a young female leader in the aerospace industry, or not even completing your education yet, has been, a barrier to some extent. And so I'm curious, did you have any obstacles in your journey, whether it be in regards to that or something else? Did you have obstacles? And if so, how were you able to overcome them?
Absolutely. There are so many obstacles, I think, not only just in the industry, but definitely being a young female in the industry. I've been very, very privileged, though, to have a really great network of support, both in family, friends, and colleagues. So that goes a long way. But there's definitely no denying that there's a bias, especially on the entrepreneurship front, trying to raise funding for a business. Trying to raise, say, for example, we're getting ready at Space Copy to launch a seed round later in the year. And even when we were doing the pre-seed, it was extremely challenging for investors to really want to take you seriously. A lot of times the business model and the use case were being validated, but the age of the founder was not. And it was definitely a stigma. And it's something that I really, really want to break down. And also, second to that is, I think, besides the whole essence of entrepreneurship, the actual part of being in the space industry, solving those engineering challenges day over day, it's definitely weary. You can come across way more challenges than you originally anticipated. There's all sorts of dynamics going on with team members. You have to make sure that everybody's working in harmony together, and that's definitely not an easy task. So I'd say as far as obstacles in the journey go, it's going to be a continuous series of obstacles. Luckily, I love an obstacle course, so I'm happy to pursue it head on. But I would definitely say that as I grow in this industry, I want to be responsible for making a change in the mindset of how people approach space, whether it's people coming from a non-traditional background. For example, you didn't get a technical degree, doesn't mean you can't be in science. And if you're looking to raise money for your company, it doesn't mean that, you have to be a certain age or a certain caliber or a certain gender to be able to successfully prove what you're doing. So if there's any takeaway that I can get from these obstacles as a learning journey is to be able to say, okay, we overcame it, but now what can we do to make it better for future generations?
It's perfectly said. I mean, as a young student myself and so many young voices, I think you really are representing the same stigma that many of us face day to day, whether it be in space or not in space. I think this is a common thread, and we are starting to see a lot of young students like yourself making incredible changes to the space sector. And every industry really that's existing today, a lot of young students are some of the key players who've made the most innovative changes. And so continuously working towards breaking down that stigma so that we can start creating a more even playing field for all innovators, regardless of their age, is so, so critical. And I think your work and your vision for Space Copy is a testament to a lot of young voices, a lot of young innovators. And I think what you're doing is so incredibly important. So thank you for sharing that. And, just hearing your story and what you've been able to already accomplish on top of your education is amazing. And so my last and final question for you today is you've given plenty of advice throughout this interview, but if you could go back in time and you're already young, but if you could give your younger self an advice maybe 2, 3 years ago, what would that advice be? Like if you could go back in time and tell yourself something, what would you tell yourself?
Okay, that's a really challenging question, but I love it. Okay, if I were to go back in time, say to shortly before I started Space Copy, when I was still doing my kind of day-to-day NASA work and just going about my business, um, I would probably say to myself that there's a better way to plan this out without trying to burn yourself out. Not that I went down that road, but I definitely over inundated myself, especially in the beginning, trying to, solve all of the challenges at once and trying to be the everything person, which is, I suppose as an entrepreneur you already are. But definitely going back in time, if I were to maybe do something better, it would be to achieve a more even balance between running a business and sustaining a good personal life. And also, from that perspective, on the business side, balancing the technical engineering with the business development. I feel like it's always a struggle to find a balance between those two different things. And then, lastly, finding a good balance between learning versus applying. So whether that's knowledge coming from work or whether that's knowledge coming from education and school, and then being able to apply it in business. I always state that I learned more running a business for a year than I did in 2.5 years of business school. But I think it's subjective. And I think at the end of the day, we're in this learning journey. I know I certainly am, which is why I always say that I'm so happy for every decision that I made along the way. But there's definitely something that can be said about achieving good balance. And that would be, I suppose, the advice that I give to myself and to anybody else who is in the space industry or in any business that involves entrepreneurship is to be able to sustain yourself as much as the business.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, first off, I think mentioning the fact that having a good balance is really important. I think being an entrepreneur is not easy in any regard, especially as a young professional. But I think what you mentioned about making sure you're cognizant about your time and what you're, focusing your skill development on is so important, and making sure you're not spreading yourself too thin is so critical. But I think, you've already been able to do so much. And I think you've had these learning lessons. You've learned what works, what doesn't work, and you'll continue to implement those in your life. And so I think for everyone, it's just a learning curve to figuring out what works and what doesn't, to make sure that they achieve that correct balance in their life. But yeah, thank you so much, Madison, for taking your time to share your advice and to share your journey and what you're doing with Space Copy. I'm honestly, as a student myself, incredibly inspired by what you're doing. And I'm sure everyone who's listening, regardless of their age, is inspired by what you're doing. And I will be cheering for you with Space Copy, and I cannot wait to see how far it goes. And I will be rooting you on, as I'm sure all of our listeners are today. So thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview.
Thank you so much, Gitika. My honor.